Hey everyone, Nick here, and for today's video, I'm going to recap all the big things that happened in the offseason for teams in the Central Division. Now, I already made a video like this for teams in the Pacific Division, so definitely check that out if you haven't already, and we'll cover free agency, trades, the draft a little bit, and any other big stories, okay? So we're going to go top to bottom with how the standings played out this past season. We'll start with the Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche. Really the big story for the Avs in this offseason, besides the Cup sellies and all that good stuff. Well, could they actually survive during free agency? They had tons of free agents, and so they had to be very selective here, manage the cap space. And you also have to consider that once we get into next offseason, Nathan MacKinnon is going to be an unrestricted free agent. So it's interesting looking at the Avs because they have $3.9 million in cap space currently as I make this video on August 24th. Nathan MacKinnon makes $6.3 million for one more year. So if you were to add that $3.9 million onto his salary for next season, he'd be a little bit over $10 million. And is Nathan MacKinnon worth that kind of money? Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. So anyway, let's talk about the big acquisitions or the big extensions. In addition to their big losses, I'll actually start with that one. So first of all, Nazem Kadri, right? Their second line center. He had 15 points in 16 playoff games and was great. He had 87 points in the regular season. He signs in Calgary with the Flames. It was pretty doubtful that the Avs would have any chance of keeping him. Next of all, goaltender Darcy Kemper. He won a majority of their playoff games. He signs in Washington at over $5 million annually. The Avs just didn't have that kind of cap space, although they did acquire Alexander Georgiev in a trade with the Rangers. So now the tandem looks like Alex Georgiev and Pavel Francouz, who did help them out in the playoffs. And when he's healthy, he can actually be a pretty darn good backup. Andre Burkowski. He had a career-high 61 points this last year. Not as effective in the playoffs, a little productive, but still not exactly the shot in the arm that they needed at that position in the postseason. And so after a 61-point season, he signs with the Seattle Kraken. And of course, they lost some other depth pieces as well, like Nico Sturm, Nick Aube-Kubel, Jack Johnson. One thing I want to make sure I don't forget here is that the Avs do actually have a new general manager. Joe Sakic now serves a more executive role in the organization, but I think he'll still have an influence on Chris McFarland. So he is the new GM. He was the assistant GM there. Now, as far as the players that they kept in the offseason, you look at the wing, Arturi Lekanen and Valerie Nachoskin. These guys had real breakthrough seasons with the Avalanche, and they were excellent in the playoffs. And it wasn't just the line mates around them, too. You really could see their influence in terms of keeping the cycle game going and forcing turnovers and pressuring the opponents out there. So in those 20 games in the playoffs, Lekanen had 14 points. He had 4 game-winning goals. That was the most on the Avalanche. And Valerie Nachoskin had 15 points in those 20 games as well. They also keep defenseman Josh Manson, who was a trade deadline acquisition. He fit in great there. The Avs defense core is just amazing with the likes of Bowen Byram and, of course, the reigning Norris Trophy winner, Cale Makar. You even have like Sam Girard and Eric Johnson. Like, these guys are pretty darn good depth defensemen. You know, they could be in a second pair on a number of other teams. But Manson was really good in the postseason, and he scored a couple of really clutch goals for the Avs as well. They also kept Darren Helm, who I liked a ton in the postseason, and Andrew Cogliano, so they still have some of that sandpaper down in the depths of the forward group. And remember, they have a lot of young stars, and so some of these players are only going to get better. Cale Makar, he's like 23, 24 years old. Bowen Byram, he came alive in the playoffs pretty well. And Alex Newhook, he's probably due for a breakout season this upcoming year. Next team here, Minnesota Wild. So things were a little different for the Wild this offseason. They are really starting to feel it with that buyout of Zach Parise and Ryan Suter from last year. So first of all, being in a tight salary cap situation, there was a casualty. And in this case, it was Kevin Fiala. So he was traded to the Los Angeles Kings after a 33-goal season, 85 points. And now he's gone to LA. But that being said, the Wild, you can at least come away with some assets here if you're a Wild fan, because they got Brock Faber, who was on Team USA at the World Juniors. He was a second-round pick a couple years ago. And they also got the first-round draft pick for the Kings this year, and they used that on Liam Öhgren, who played for Sweden in the World Juniors. And on top of that, they also had another first-round draft pick, I want to say. The way that they've been able to draft and develop guys like Marco Rossi and Matt Boldy. They also have Jesper Wallstedt in their system, maybe the top goaltending prospect in the world. Yeah, I've seen this before, that the Wild have the best prospect system in the NHL. So even if they're just a bubble playoff team, maybe these next couple of years, they could really turn things on in the future. They also extended a couple of players, Marc-Andre Fleury being the headliner here. Only a .910 save percentage and a 2.74 goals against with the Wild, but they won 9 of the 11 games that he played in. And so Fleury's going to be the number one because they traded away Cam Talbot, who was actually better for them this season, especially in the second half. They also extended Jake Middleton, who came over at the trade deadline from the Sharks, and he was a really good fit there. He was playing, I think, top 4 minutes for a stay-at-home defenseman and a guy who can stick up for teammates, add some physicality, and so he's panned out really well in the NHL. Also, one other thing was Kirill Kaprizov was spending the offseason in Russia, but he has returned to the States, so I don't think there's any doubt he's going to play for the full season. All right, next team. Boom, St. Louis Blues here. So in terms of acquisitions and signings, it was really low-key for them. They did sign former Panther Noel Acciari for some physicality there in the bottom 6. No trade updates on the Vlad Tarasenko front. That was something that had heated up more so this past season, but after a career year, it looks like he's going to stay there for at least one more year. Then he becomes an unrestricted free agent. However, they did lose a couple of players. First of all, they lost Ville Husso, who took over for Jordan Binnington as the number 1 goaltender, had a fantastic season, at least in the regular season, even though he had a kind of decline as the season progressed. Still really good numbers, though. But he did struggle in the playoffs a little bit, so I'm not entirely sure what the Blues are going to be missing out on. If Binnington can play like he did in the postseason before he got injured, then they're going to be in good hands. But when I look past Binnington, they've got Thomas Greiss as their backup goaltender. In addition to, I think Joel Hofer is someone who could maybe serve that role eventually. But anyway, Greiss came over from the Red Wings this past year. .891 save percentage, 3.66 goals against average. Alex Nedeljkovic hadn't played well either, at least statistically. So that was partially because of the Red Wings defense, sans Moritz Seider, of course. But anyway, maybe with some stronger blue liners there, Thomas Greiss can bounce back, but he's getting into the twilight of his career. And in addition to that, they lost David Perron, who had 27 goals in just 67 games this past regular season. But the Blues, they have all sorts of depth scoring. They had 9 20-goal scorers, and so they returned 8 of them to their lineup. But yeah, other than that, no big acquisitions or trades or anything like that. All right, Dallas Stars. So the biggest change here came with coaching. So they Rick Bowness, I believe, had quit the Dallas Stars, or at least it was a mutual parting of ways. And they've hired Peter DeBoer from the Vegas Golden Knights. DeBoer, of course, got the Knights to 2 straight conference final appearances. Now, and don't forget, DeBoer always kills it in his first year. He had a good first season in Florida. His first season with the Devils, they went to the Stanley Cup. His first season with the Sharks, they go to the Stanley Cup. His first season with the Knights, they go to the conference final. But the big signing, of course, former Florida Panther Mason Marchment. And so he signs a 4-year deal at $4.5 million annually. And I mean, look at this past season, 54 games, 18 goals, 29 assists for 47 points. So a really good potential middle 6 asset there. And I imagine he'll be inspired to take his play at least to that level this upcoming season, hopefully for the full 82 games as well, because his father passed away just before the NHL draft. So condolences to the Marchment family. The Stars also signed Colin Miller as a bit of a reinforcement for their defense because they lost John Klingberg, who doesn't really play much defense in the first place. But Miller has put up some offensive numbers decently in the past with Vegas, I think specifically. But he'll probably be a little bit further down the lineup, maybe with somebody like Thomas Harley. All right, Nashville Predators. Okay, so they actually had a fairly busy offseason. And it's interesting because a year or two ago, I would have said that the Preds should have torn things down entirely. But somehow they were able to stay in the playoffs. John Hines turned things around pretty well, I think. And David Poile still has his job. He's been with that organization now for 25 years as general manager. First of all, for Nashville, they trade for Ryan McDonough. They lose Philip Myers, and they had the cap space. I was surprised that they were able to make that work, considering McDonough's over $6 million annually for like 3 or 4 more years. But he's still able to get the job done. I liked his performance in the playoffs in his own end. Then they signed Nino Niederreiter, 2 years at $4 million annually. He had 24 goals for the Carolina Hurricanes, and we'll see if he goes on the second line or maybe the third line. But that's a really good contract for a guy who's right in his prime and can contribute quite like that. They also extended Philip Forsberg long-term, 42 goals in 69 games. Yeah, he does disappear a bit the last couple of playoffs, but I don't put it entirely on him. So I think it was 8 years at 8.5 annually. So that is steep, especially when you consider, they get McDonough over $6 million there. But yeah, I mean, you talk about one of the most electric goal scorers in the NHL. Forsberg certainly is one of them, and I think he's only 27 or 28 years old. Their biggest loss was Lekanen. He had 13 goals in a third-line role there. And in the draft, they were pretty lucky to get Joakim Kemell out of the Finnish Liga. He had 15 goals in 39 games this past season, playing against mostly older men. And 17th overall pick, even though he was slotted to go more around like 13th or maybe even 12th. All right, next team here are the Winnipeg Jets. They also have a coaching change. So they hired Rick Bowness, who I just talked about from Dallas. And of course, Paul Maurice had been fired earlier that year, and now he's in Florida. Now they ended up hanging on to Pierre-Luc Dubois for just 1 year. Although, there is definitely some controversy about where Dubois wants to play in his career, because his agent had said in an interview that he wants to play in Montreal, and then Dubois has like a separate press conference saying he does not want to play in Montreal. So who knows what the heck happens there. But he and the rest of the Jets core, they returned, so they haven't decided to blow things up just yet. They did lose Paul Stastny to the Hurricanes, but he is getting a little bit long in the tooth in his career, so not as big of a contributor. And in the draft, they got Rutger McGroarty, and also in the first round toward the end, they selected Brad Lambert, who is one of those cases where maybe he has the most raw talent, but in terms of his discipline, his commitment, his consistency, it's not quite there. So that's why he fell really late in the draft, even though, earlier on he was projected to go a lot higher. So he was also playing in the Finnish Liga. Our next team is the Chicago Blackhawks, and yeah, them and the Arizona Coyotes, not the most cheerful of news to share with you. So the Blackhawks, they have a fire sale in the making, and it hasn't involved Patrick Kane or Jonathan Toews just yet, but they are on the last year of their contract. So this season is pretty make or break for Kyle Davidson, general manager, and the Chicago Blackhawks. So first of all, they trade two-time 40-goal scorer Alex DeBrincat to the Ottawa Senators. Crazy. And they trade former third overall draft pick Kirby Dach to the Montreal Canadiens. Now, they got a good amount of assets overall, right? Especially for Kirby Dach. Not so much with DeBrincat, but when you pull all that together, they got 2 first-round draft picks, a second-round draft pick, and a third-round draft pick, and that was all just for this year. So who knows? Maybe they'll be able to form a good new core in the next couple of seasons. I mean, the Hawks have been out of the playoffs now for what? About 5 years, I want to say. They did have a couple of notable signings, including Andreas Athanasiou from LA previously, and Max Domi from the Carolina Hurricanes, but those guys just signed for 1 year. So they might not even be around once the trade deadline comes. So not bad to flesh out the lineup with those talents. And they also took on Petr Mrazek's contract after that was handed over from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they got assets in return there. And also, they have a new head coach, and it's Luke Richardson, former NHL defenseman, had a 21-year NHL career. I had no idea. That's a long, long time. And he was a former assistant with the Senators, then with the Islanders and the Montreal Canadiens. He was actually on that team that went to the Stanley Cup in 2021, and he did coach in Game 3 of the conference final. He was the head coach for that because Dominique Ducharme was on the COVID list, and so, but the Habs actually won that game in overtime. So there you go, Luke Richardson starting off pretty well as a head bench boss. And lastly, we conclude with the Arizona Coyotes, and this team, well, they might as well be an ECHL team at this point. They're not even playing in an NHL arena this upcoming season. So they're going to be playing at Arizona State University, right? That arena is going to seat around 5,000 people, or at least the total capacity. And the Coyotes will be there for 3 years playing at Mullet Arena. Yes, Mullet Arena. Business up front, party in the back. You know it. Anyway, their biggest news in terms of player personnel was at the draft, where they drafted Logan Cooley, 3rd overall. Someone who could have gone maybe 2nd overall or even 1st. This past season with the U.S. National Development Program, 51 games, 27 goals, 48 assists for 75 points. Usually players in that league actually do put up over a point per game. The top players put well over a point per game. And then Cooley's going to play at the University of Minnesota this upcoming season, so he won't have a chance to make the roster. They also made a draft day deal with the San Jose Sharks, so they acquired the 11th overall pick in the draft, and they selected from the Winnipeg Ice Connor Geekie. I think he's a center, I want to say. And so you've got him, you've got Logan Cooley, and you also have Dylan Guenther. We'll see if he has any chance of making the roster opening day, because, I mean, he's got to have at least some sort of legitimate chance here, given the other players on this roster from the NHL and even the AHL level. And they also acquired a bunch of assets to take on Zach Kassian's contract. He was previously from the Edmonton Oilers, and part of that was the 29th overall pick, and they used that on defenseman Maverick Lamoureux from the Drummondville Voltigeurs of the QMJHL. They still have $20 million left in cap space. They didn't re-sign Phil Kessel. I don't know if they've been trying to negotiate something there. Maybe they take on another bad contract or two and get even more draft picks. But looking ahead at their draft picks, it's almost like they can't even get that many more because just look at this, guys. 2023, they do have room if they want to get, another first or another second. But 2024, they have, 4 additional second-round picks or 3 additional second-round picks and 3 additional third-round picks. And then 2025, they have 3 additional seconds. So 2036 Stanley Cup champion Arizona Coyotes, book it. Anyway, guys, that's going to conclude our offseason recap for the Central Division. Now the question is, am I going to make one for teams in the Eastern Conference? I'm not entirely sure, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll stick around for more great video content here on Flying Fluffy Hockey. You can also follow me on my main channel here, Twisted Wrister Hockey on YouTube, and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram as well. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch up with you again real soon.